Hello, this is a quick revision video for Living Space by MTS Darker, part of the EDUCAS anthology. So again, the idea here is that you already know this poem, but we're just going back over it to refine and improve your knowledge. Because let's say you're supposed to analyze this poem and think about the comparisons to another poem, or let's say you've been given another poem and you want to compare it to this one. Let's just keep in mind the lines of the poem and what it's saying. Okay? Living space. There are just not enough straight lines. That is the problem. Nothing is flat or parallel. Beams balance crookedly on supports thrust off the vertical. Nails clutch at open seams. The whole structure leans dangerously towards the miraculous. Into this rough frame, someone has squeezed a living space, and even dared to place these eggs in a wire basket. Fragile curves of white hung out over the dark edge of a slanted universe, gathering the light into themselves as if they were the bright, thin walls of faith. Now, of course, this living space is where somebody is somebody's home, right? Not a home that you and me would consider good enough, as evidence from the first few lines. There are just not enough straight lines. That is the problem. Because, of course, if you're looking at this from a Westerner's perspective, there is a problem. These are not homes that we are used to. In fact, this poem represents the slums, in particular the slums from Mumbai, which MTS Darker, she writes poetry trying to bring to light some of the issues and the realities of people who are not part of the Western world, but also a different type of life. I don't think we're necessarily meant to feel pity or sadness for these people, because there's a big sense of hope in this poem that's worth considering in a second, right? So, represents the slums of Mumbai. And we know that the slum in Mumbai are the largest in the world, okay? Mumbai is a thriving city in India, but 75% or 70% of its inhabitants live in the slums, and they're basically homes, like a vast expanse of land right outside the city with all the skyscrapers, where people essentially make homes out of what's known as found materials. So, aluminium, bits and pieces of bricks and wood and plastic, and everything is just kind of put together into a makeshift home where people spend their lives. And of course, people often come to Mumbai in search of a better life because it's a thriving city, and people are hoping to make a better life there, and oftentimes end up in the slums. Okay, so we start with a third-person narrator perspective, making a judgment on these. There are just not enough straight lines, right? Judgment made from the beginning. Third-person narrator. Western perspective. As if there has to be a problem because these houses aren't built well, right? This would not pass a surveyor's analysis, right? That is the problem. Nothing is flat or parallel. Beams balance crookedly on supports thrust off the vertical. Now, I always recommend to students that they look at the verbs, because when you're zooming in on words, you want to consider the effects of the verbs, right? Of course, this is a being verb that connects to problem. So the problem is the noun, and if we're zooming in on it, we have to analyze that something is wrong. Who says? The narrator says. We can kind of judge the narrator here. Something is wrong, not right. off kilter, which of course connects back to thrust off the vertical. Now the word thrust, balance crookedly on supports, thrust off the vertical. So again, off balance. Teetering. On edge. Okay. And again, balancing highlights a lack of stability, doesn't it? And that's a verb again. So if we're zooming in on these words, considering the verbs, really helps us understand kind of the bigger thing here. Nails clutch at open seams. I mean, the word clutch is quite a vibrant verb. Highlights some imagery here. To clutch is to desperately cling. Okay, oftentimes just defining the words in a different way really helps us understand what the poet is getting to here. And it's nails. Well, these are the nails that you would create something with, but it also could be fingernails from a human clutching at trying to create a home, trying to create a life. Okay, because these open seams connect to material. You know, if you've sewn something or you have some clothing that's coming apart, it has open seams. You know, it's not working very well, and it's well, some would say ruined, but it's gaping or what would we say? Ruined, not ruined necessarily, but almost. The whole structure leans dangerously towards the miraculous, right? This is the longest line of the poem, and it's almost like the line itself is dangerous, right? You can see the structure of the poem reflects the content, right? The poem is not written in straight lines, right? Nothing is flat or parallel in the poem itself to reflect the spaces that it's discussing, okay? Leans dangerously. So if something is leaning, you know, potential fall, right? Or something might break, possible break in the future, or destruction. And of course that's supported by by the adverb dangerously towards the miraculous, which of course is an interesting, you're juxtaposing the word dangerous, which is a very negative word, with the word miraculous, which brings in the aspect of hope for a miracle, for something to happen that maybe shouldn't. Then of course you've got this tiny little stanza in the middle. Into this rough frame someone has squeezed a living space. Someone, well, it's not personal because it could be anyone. And in fact, it has been anyone. It's many people, right? So it's impersonal here. And if the word squeezed highlights, well, putting something maybe where it doesn't fit. Okay, so small space. Forcing something to work. It's like they're forcing life where no one's really necessarily intended it to be, but it needs to be, and it's working. And a living space, not a home. I mean, she doesn't say home, but a functional place. A place that works for now. And even dared, and I love this verb dared, because to dare is to do something that maybe isn't considered right or good or people don't think is possible, but someone tries it anyway. Not possible. So it takes, in order to dare, it takes courage and vision in many ways. Okay? Dared to place these eggs in a wire basket. Fragile curves of white hung out over the dark edge of a slanted universe. Right? So this is the metaphor. These eggs become the fragile curves of white hung out over it. So the white and dark imagery here. And of course the fragility of their life. Similar, connected to the eggs, right? If something is fragile, it's easily breakable. It's almost valuable because it might not be there and it might not last, okay? Hung out over the dark edge of a slanted universe, gathering the light into themselves as if they were the bright, thin walls of faith. So we have another simile here. And we're connecting to faith. Now, it might be a religion, but it could also be, well, what is faith? Well, this is a noun. This is the idea that hope or belief in something being possible, in something greater than themselves. Than what is, or self. Okay, so this highlights perhaps the belief in the people that live there, that they can do it. And in fact, the existence of these structures shows that it does. Okay, and of course, Imtiaz Darkar is a Pakistani-born Scottish author who is known again for her poems and discussions about women and children and social issues in other countries. She's written a few documentary series discussing the issues in places like Mumbai. And she really tries to bring a focus and a light to social discussions and issues around the world. So a really multicultural poet. And she was actually up for Poet Laureate, but she stepped back from the position, which of course is what Simon Armitage, the author of Manhunt, does, because she wanted to focus on her poetry more than, I guess, her public life. So she is very well respected and known. And this is her poem, Living Space. One poem that people always like to consider comparing it to is London. Okay.